We're here to talk about CCV2 stuff. Why would you want to migrate from the old accelerators? Why do you have to, but also why would you want to?
Right.
And what are the advantages of doing it? Sort of what's the carrot, what's the stick? But beyond that, once you decide you want to do it, how do things go well? How do things go badly? Right? How have we seen things go? And like, how can you make your implementation one of the ones that goes well?
Right. And some of the maybe the elephants in the room around what does it actually mean to do a migration off the accelerator?
Totally. Yeah. What is actually involved?
Yeah. And it's a lot more than just the storefront, which I think we found, in working with our customers and others, that they underestimate. There is a component to it, probably about 30% that's more on the back end, right? They either have hidden logic in controllers and, maybe older architectures and patterns and approaches. And so it's really about a transformation to headless where you're looking to expose those functions at the right granularity. And then we should probably talk a little bit about, there's the second elephant, maybe the larger one, which is around the CMS.
Yes, totally.
Do you stay with SmartEdit? Do you go with a new headless CMS? Those are interesting and important questions, right? That relate. And then, geez, there's a lot of elephants today. We're building a whole zoo, but maybe it's more of a giraffe. But the next one is, what storefront technology do you use? SAP gives you one with the composable storefront, or what's commonly known in industry lingo as Spartacus, which is kind of an aggressive name for a storefront.
Kind of.
Like
I don't actually know why it's called
Roman.
that. There's the thing where there was a slave rebellion and everybody said, I'm Spartacus, so they couldn't come after any one person, right? There's like a famous scene in the Spartacus movie about that. Is that it? It's like because headless is kind of a misnomer, like we've talked about in other podcasts. It's more like many heads. That's why our own internal React based thing we call Hydra internally, because it's actually so I don't know if that's what they were going for, or if it was just cool Roman soldier sounding name and they didn't think too much past that. I don't actually know. I have no idea, but it's
kind of stuck. It's kind of stuck though, right? It's stuck. It's funny how that happens in technology. Is something comes out and then there's a rebrand or a change, but it doesn't stick. I mean, how many customers do we work with that still call it Hybris?
Totally.
And when was the rebrand? 2017.
Thereabouts. I think there's a few reasons for that. One is just like you say, stickiness. People start calling it that and they keep calling it that. Another is that it's all over the code, right? So like you're still seeing the word Hybris all the time. And I don't think any company is going to spend the money to remove it from the code itself. That would be like a crazy thing to do. So in the same way that, Amarsis is still all over Engagement Cloud, Gigya is still all over CDP and CDC, like they're just not going away for that reason. In addition to just like, if you were using it before the rebrand, why would you, you're not going to update your language. We're not really going to call it. There's a reason that when people talk about X, the everything app, they have to say the app formerly known as Twitter every single time, because that's how everyone knows it,
Or they just still call it Twitter.
Totally. So we should probably back up and define a couple of terms. We've referred to Spartacus, right, which is the new headless storefront that sort of ships with the new version of Commerce Cloud. We've also referred to the old accelerators. So what are those? Like, what do we actually mean when we're talking about the accelerators? You want me to define it, or do you want to?
Well, I take a stab at it. I think, the accelerators, if you look at it historically, the concept was, when Hybris was this unique framework in e-commerce that lets you have ultimate flexibility on how you approach things, it was an accelerated path to getting the storefront part of it live with the necessary integrations, business logic to kind of get those really like website style functionality out. And so that's what the accelerators were, and they were a package. And then they kind of grew in scope to encompass the kind of entire selling process, right? And so you remember we had telco accelerators, right? Financial services,
travel,
B2B, travel. And so all these accelerators, but the limitation there was they coupled business functionality with the end user experience.
It wasn't headless in the way we mean it, because there was no real decoupling between the front end and the back end.
Yeah. Exactly. And I don't think any of us have to argue why headless makes a lot of sense. If there's anything in the last year, it's really pushed that narrative further forward around the benefits of exposing APIs to business functionality that's not tied directly to the presentation. So when we talk about the accelerator, that's what we're talking about. It's business functionality tied to the presentation. And what we're doing in the industry is separating that, right? So you can expose those business services broadly across organizations for different use cases that are not necessarily just tied to the storefront. One very obvious one is mobile. That drove a lot of this. We have multiple different channels. We use the term omni-channel for like a decade, right? Around that, where you could buy anywhere.
Yeah. Interestingly, in that decade, we don't really have any new channels, though. I find that really fascinating. Like wearables never really took off as their own channel. There weren't like VR storefronts that really took off. They're the same channels, but how we deploy to them has gotten a lot more sophisticated.
Yeah, absolutely. But there are different channels in some respects that you think of customer care.
That's a good point.
Being a selling channel in the back office. There's different channels in that there's other ancillary third parties now that you might provide this functionality to. We see this a lot of time with procurement systems in B2B and different, functionalities you want to actually expose to them. And we see that hybrid nature in a lot of commerce systems where, hey, you're serving your D2C channel or your B2C channel. You also have B2B, but then you also have this ancillary set of systems where you might be serving that functionality out to other third parties. And even think about providing data feeds and ability to purchase from, separate systems like Google Shopping and other things like that.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Yeah, like end user facing channels have stayed pretty static, but in terms of what you might syndicate out to, it's actually pretty different. Yeah, the landscape has changed a lot. And so like the movement from the accelerators to a more headless setup is a reaction to that. This is SAP saying, okay, the old school coupled approach is not going to work. Yeah. We've got to move to something new. And that's why Spartacus or the composable storefront exists, right? They created that as their sort of in-house offering that does still look and feel pretty close to the old accelerators by default, but that is built on a different framework that is in fact headless and decoupled from the backend.
Yep. Yeah. And it's a Angular based storefront. Now in the industry, do we see as many Angular based storefronts as we do React? No. I would say, though, there's some arguments that Angular and React, specifically with like Next.js powering some of it, they're converging a fair bit. So that's those are, there's not, the delta between them is not quite as broad, but we definitely see customers wrestling with the challenge around resourcing for Angular resources. And I need somebody to build and maintain this. So maybe it's faster and cheaper to choose composable storefront, but what's the maintenance look like versus doing this? And then of course you have the whole fact that SAP's provided the framework and structure. If you're going pure play, custom Next.js, you don't have that structure as much, right? You have to set that up. You have to do it. Now we haven't even delved into it. There are a set of accelerators on top of that for that approach in Next.js. And there's some accelerator storefronts themselves that accelerate your headless journey, which
you're using accelerator more broadly now, not like capital A, Hybris accelerators, but like things that could do the same thing. The metaphor we used to use back in the day with the accelerators was like, instead of building your house up from foundations, maybe you have an existing house and maybe you tear a wall down to studs, or maybe you're just painting a room. However much you're changing or not changing, you're going to move faster if you're starting from some of the basics being pre-built, is kind of the idea, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. And if you think about some of those, right, like we've seen customers with Alakai, different view storefronts, and then of course doing, custom storefronts. There's different partners provide different accelerator options, right? We have one called Hydra, but there's several others, and they're more.
It's not uncommon for a partner to have their own offering, right? Like how much stuff they have in them and what verticals they were built for varies pretty wildly, but not at all unusual for a partner to say, yeah, we've kind of like productized our secret sauce a little bit. And if you go with us, you can have
Yeah,
this,
and
quickly.
get to market faster. And then
Yeah, yeah,
really the importance around that is the structure for that development to happen.
yeah. Yeah.
Ideally, to reduce the maintenance long term and the rework, right? So you're not just relying on individual talented developers to build your next storefront. They have the guardrails in place that make good architectural decisions on the front end architecture that yields payoffs for years to come. That's the concept.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Okay, so we're talking a lot about like why this change makes sense and what the change looks like. Why are we talking about it now? We actually talked about this previously, and I think the dates have moved a little bit. But the core message is that the old accelerators, there are folks who are still running them, and some folks are, they've sort of like got their own relatively custom setups that they're quite happy with, but they're on their way out as an officially supported product, right? There's like a sort of a drop dead date coming. I think we're talking 2028 currently.
Yeah, officially they're no longer going to be available, is my understanding, in 2027. They won't be released as part of the update on your CCV2 installation. But there's an extended support window till the end of 2028 where it'll be supported. Now, it's important to say it's not going to stop working all of a sudden. It just won't be maintained. Security patches, releases. And of course, we know with that technology set and being at the edge of what your customers are touching, and what that means, it's publicly exposed. You're now opening up potential windows for vulnerabilities. And we don't
Yeah.
have to belabor the point that that's where vulnerabilities could be exploited in your system. And so it's
Could you go
important that
rogue?
those are
Absolutely.
secure.
But it's a relatively high risk area to not have in support, right? If you're going to be on a platform at all.
It's higher risk, and we've seen with that technology stack is it's just a lot harder to keep the content up to date. I'll be honest, in the over 13 years we've been doing this in commerce, we have not seen a great CMS implementation with the accelerators. I just haven't seen it. But how many great implementations of CMS that let the business move quickly, update content without IT, and stay fresh have we seen with headless storefronts? Well, a lot.
Yeah.
So that's really a main driver, I would say, that likely if you don't do anything, you're missing out on a lot of that time to market on the business front, on getting marketing content updated, because you're talking about more of a server side system that's just not used to getting content out quickly, keeping things fresh, not requiring developers. So you're kind of accepting a large legacy weight as you move the ball forward.
So to move on to a different elephant then, or was this one the giraffe? I forget. When you move into this headless world, you have a different CMS as well, right? The old CMS cockpit in Hybris
Yeah.
way back in the day couldn't have served a mobile app. It just simply wasn't built for that. For that matter, SmartEdit, which is the thing that's built into both sort of like the old CCV2 deployments with the accelerators and the CMS that is the default if you go with Spartacus, can't really serve a mobile app either, right? It can serve a Spartacus storefront. Correct me if I'm wrong there, but I think like
it can for sure serve mobile. The challenge is it's not going to do it very well.
Fair.
It's possible to do. It's just not going to do it super well. I think we've seen customers, if they truly are looking to do a digital strategy where they're leveraging content out to multiple channels, SmartEdit becomes a challenge to move forward with that setup. While it's okay at managing content for a site, it's not great at managing structured content that truly, and this is the other thing with the headless CMS, is so there's a main concept here with the headless CMS that's very, very different from how SmartEdit is set up. So SmartEdit gives you kind of component style structure, but you have to pre-build those components and you only get to kind of show what those components are. A headless CMS is all about disconnecting the semi-structured and structured data. So you're really storing everything in a structured format, which lets the front ends visually display it. So it gives you a lot of flexibility. And what we found with a lot of customers who are using SmartEdit or even others is they'd embed a lot of HTML or what we call unstructured, semi-structured content around the data. And that poses a lot of challenges to taking content to multiple channels. Like it just doesn't work well. So, we've done several headless implementations and a lot of success, especially when you go to mobile channels. You get flexibility. We hear a lot. One of the main things we hear is, can I manage the same content on mobile and on the web? The nice thing about disconnecting the presentation from the data in the headless CMS is the default answer is, well, of course, yes. Now, most businesses actually choose to segregate it because they want a little bit of a different flair. And we see the reuse at a different level. It's not necessarily at the whole page. It's, can I reuse a component and images and things of that nature? But I think the message there is flexibility. Those systems with the structure give you a lot of flexibility.
That makes a lot of sense. And so when we talk about, we haven't actually said it, but when we talk about headless CMSs, we're talking about solutions like Contentful or Content Stack would be another one. These are sort of like the technologies that you could use to drive these different channels, the obvious like list of omni-channel channels we always think of, and also the sort of like, well, the ones that have quietly been added to the list, like you were talking about earlier in the last, 10 years or so.
Yeah. Builder.io, AEM has a headless version now. On one of their newer versions. So those type of technologies sets. Yeah.
So then let's talk with all of that in mind. And, I think it's important to get those definitions out there because often these things are just sort of like said without being defined. And I think people kind of smile and nod and like sort of like half understand or something. So it's good to be clear about it. But with all that in mind, like, so you're a business that is considering making this move. You're going from the old accelerators to a new headless storefront. Perhaps you're still on premise and you're thinking about moving into the cloud. What should you consider? Like, what is going to help you be successful, right? This is a big question, I know.
Big question.
And obviously it depends a lot on your business, right? It depends on the verticals, but like, what are some patterns we've seen in terms of, I can start with one, right? Like data, right? Like if you've got a whole bunch of customizations, there's a lot of long tail effects of that we can talk about. But one of them is that you almost certainly have been sort of like solving one problem and causing other problems by solving it in terms of the way your search index, for example, is structured. I think that's a really, really common problem. So kind of going back to the drawing board and thinking like, is the way we have this stuff structured fit to purpose? I think if you've already begun that process, it's going to make the migration much easier. But if you think that's maybe not the best one, then hit me with something else.
I think that's good. I think, there's quite a few things you're going to have to consider. I think with, you mentioned moving to CCV2. So that's, a bit of a project in and of itself, but understanding when you're moving to a modern storefront solution is when you said data, that's important because likely the pages you have today are not well structured. So to take the leap to migrate to a very formal structure, that's going to be, I believe, kind of the make it or break it. Like, of course, you need to get the UI right. Of course, you need to get the UX. You need a engineering team that can deliver, those core features. But the first important point I would think about is there's more of a lift on your business transformation and marketing team to go from semi-structured data to a structured approach. So we see the first investment that makes a lot of sense is understanding this content model that you want to set up. And it's useful to work with a group that already has an idea of how those should be structured and has already done a migration, because then they can help guide that process to, okay, we're going for, well, here's the natural set of components that you likely should do. If you want to move quickly, you don't jump to, well, let's do a Figma content model of greenfield and like evaluate everything and build our own custom content model inside there. Like, you can do that, but it's just not going to move you as quickly as you want to go.
If your goal is speed, greenfield doesn't actually make that much sense, right? Like if you are going back to first principles, maybe you're rolling your own, maybe you're moving to a different platform, what have you. But if you're looking to leverage what already works and move quickly, that's probably not the way you want to go. You probably do want to more take the approach you're talking about. Yeah.
And Contentful and Content Stack have those kind of content models, accelerators that are going to give you that base structure, that are going to let you create pages with a key set of components from banners, carousels, everything you're going to need. And then the engineering team takes care and just presents that on the front end. But at least you have a target to migrate to for all that unstructured content you can kind of work down the line.
I'm really glad you made the distinction there between the content migration stuff, like making the distinction between going headless or going to a headless storefront versus simply moving to CCV2. You mentioned that's a project in and of itself. Talk a little bit more about that, right? Outside of content migration, right? What other stuff are we talking about? What activities when you
moving to CCV2 from an on-premise solution?
Yeah, for those who were still in that stage, or who were maybe thinking they might stay on-prem, right? Like, what are the differences, and like, what would the process be of moving, and why might you want to move?
Well, the first major thing is SAP is no longer releasing updates.
Right, as we were talking about earlier.
On-premise customers. So it's not just the accelerator, though, that this affects.
Totally.
It's the broader platform. And so a lot of teams are now going to have to understand that you're taking on the maintenance, security patching, fixes of Spring, Java versions. I mean, the Java version with Spring upgrade of SAP Commerce was probably the single largest driver, I'm guessing, of why SAP chose the date they chose. Because the long-term support, they needed to move up to a new version of Java, which required a new version of Spring, which is a lot of surgery across the system to get that updated.
We haven't actually said, but Java and Spring were sort of the basis of, of Hybris and particularly the accelerators back in the day. So having compatibility with a new version is not a small lift.
Yeah. And so, that process moving from on-prem, I mean, you're going to gain a lot of things with it. So it's a bit of a different paradigm. And if you've been doing all the DevOps up to this point, like building your own Kubernetes, structured DevOps instances, monitoring, things like this, that's maybe the biggest lift change is SAP provides a lot of that on the Azure stack. So you're going to get Dynatrace, you're going to get all that management. All you're doing at that point is pointing it at a package. It's going to take care of deploying it. It's going to take care of hosting it. It's going to take care of giving access. And then you're basically plopping a CDN in front of it from what you have. And then you're off to the races on your existing stack. So likely a reduction in some of your DevOps workflow and customizations, right? Because now SAP is taking that on. The other key implication is your data. If you're storing that, you potentially are going to be having to move to Azure's MSQL instance. And so in doing that, that could be a bit of a migration effort, depending if you're running in MySQL or Postgres, or because, of course, SAP supported Oracle, HANA, and several different instances of databases as well.
Yeah, that all makes sense. So, I mean, it sounds like you're saying the actual migration part, both in terms of the content in the front end and in terms of the logic in the back end, is difficult, specialized work, but it's sort of not rocket science in a certain sense, right? You have to know what you're doing, but it is more a question of diligence and effort and being careful and testing and all the key stuff about these kinds of projects than anything else. Where things go wrong is in like planning, governance, like alignment, like knowing what you want, right? So like you kind of like, fair to say, like, I know this is a self-interested statement, but you need a consultative relationship because you have to like know what you're doing going in. Like if you sort of try to sleepwalk through this kind of project, it's likely to not necessarily fail, right? But go badly, take longer than you thought, hit complications that you didn't anticipate. Fair to say?
Yeah, and I think anytime you're touching your experience with your customers, you want people that truly understand how important that is, right? It's a UX that is going to touch your customers directly. And it feeds into your brand reputation,
totally.
How you roll that out. It's
in some ways, it's the thing people think of when they think about your brand, right? Like, Yeah.
Exactly. But it also has the potential to provide maybe one of the biggest lifts in getting that right with a nice headless CMS is the site's going to feel more modern. It's going to
Hmm.
give those intangible feelings to your customer that the brand really cares about my interaction with them. And that's something that we've really felt. I think one of the major challenges with this is doing it, though there is a way to just do the project and have the experience still feel suboptimal. So
Mm.
one of the major drawbacks or gotchas on headless, if you think about it, technically speaking, you have a channel or a front end, whether it's your app or your website, making headless requests to your back end system. If you line that up and every page load has 60 plus data requests for each
Mm.
component, round trip time, and now the site is painting and flickering organically in front of your users, that's a completely different approach than thinking about, okay, how is that rendering occurring? A little bit of pre-rendering, a little bit of a caching, a little bit of, oh, you need the page, I have it for you. Boom. You think we see things like issues with lighthouse scores
Mm.
because teams are just doing the project functionally. They're not hitting the intangibles on the right architectural approach, the right lighthouse scoring. They don't know how to get the best performance from something like content stack or contentful.
Totally. This is where the
Now,
specialization in
shameless
the experience
plug,
comes in.
we
Yeah,
do.
yeah. Right. Yeah, no, totally, totally.
But
Didn't mean
these
to
are
cut you off
important
before the
things we're
shameless
trying to
plug. Yeah.
communicate to the market and tell people, hey, we understand this stuff to make it that experience
Yeah.
so much better
100%.
than we see a lot of businesses do right now.
I would go so far as to say if you're going to go through the process of doing the kind of migration we're talking about, you should get these kinds of results, right? You should be
Yeah,
getting the lighthouse
they
score
should expect
optimized, and
them.
you should expect them. Exactly. So yeah, I mean, shameless plug, we are, some of the people, not the only people in the world, of course, but we are some people
Yeah.
who can definitely help you achieve that goal. If you know that this is a thing you want to do or need to do, or both, you need someone to help you make the most of it and get out of it what you should be getting out of it, I think.
Yeah. The other thing that I would say is, we talked briefly about the storefronts, but choosing that next platform, whether it's SAP's composable storefront, whether it's Alakai, a Vue storefront, or open source, or custom rolling your own in React, or using a partner's accelerated storefront. Those are big decisions that are going to affect not just your implementation, but your maintenance long term, how you resource and staff it. So there's very interesting pros and cons to the different approaches
We talked about doing a
on how to do
podcast
that.
about that, but it is so specific to the customer. Like it's more an activity you have to do one to one, which if you want to, shoot us an email, but there isn't really one size fits all advice, I don't think, right? It's not as though, the market is such that it's always correct to roll your own and you should always use React or something like that. It's way more complicated than that. And it's more particular to your circumstance and your team's skill set and your current stack and all of that.
Yeah, and I think now what's your appetite for AI and
Mm-hmm.
context engineering as part of that process?
Mm.
If you have a higher tolerance to more code being written by an LLM as part of that process, perhaps a custom built storefront is more for you because you can roll something relatively quickly. The challenge becomes, you need the right guardrails or context. That's what we talk about in context engineering around, okay, if we're going to adopt Claude, here's the standards. We're going to create these skills when developers are building the application. They're going to do X, Y, Z. Here's what we expect. Here's how we're going to review PRs, because the amount of code that can be generated from these LLMs is insurmountable to review for a human. So you have to
Mm.
build in some processes. But can you move faster? Yeah, absolutely. But then you have to be okay with a lot of that code being written by LLMs. I mean, that's kind of the dark horse in the industry right now, is that
Hmm.
there are movements happening where there's less and less code being written by humans.
We should say too, we have a lot of experience doing every single line by hand, and we have more and more experience with the kinds of organizations you're talking about, where there's an appetite for having machine acceleration on that stuff and sort of everything in between. So if
Yeah.
you want to talk about the pros and cons of each approach, we're also, that's another shoot us an email thing, right? Because it does get pretty particular. But I think you're right. And I guess maybe as a closing question, in this zoo we've been building, right? The other elephant in this increasingly crowded room full of elephants and giraffes and such that people sometimes ask me is like, well, if we're using Claude to code the front end, why not just build our own commerce engine from scratch too, right? Why not just let
Yeah.
context engineering take care of the whole thing? I think there are good reasons why not, at the absolute least right now. But I'm curious for your perspective on that.
Yeah, I think you're talking about a different breadth of business process. And like,
Mm-hmm.
if you're undertaking a headless implementation, like a headless storefront implementation, by nature, it is contract based with the back end. So you're talking about, okay, we're going to build a contract with the back end systems that are providing business services, APIs, CMS content, workflows. It's uniquely positioned to leverage the moment we're in with AI. So it makes a lot of sense to use AI to help expedite this process. What's less uniquely uh, positioned for an advantage at this point are the messier business processes that occur on the back end. And it's not to say it can't be done, but there's a completely different implementation uh, approach. You're talking about people, business workflows, and conversations and discussions, hosting, maintenance, and complicated flows that at this point we haven't gotten a great way of approaching with AI. Will it get there? Maybe, but you're talking about hitting risk tolerance 15 out of 10 to make something like that happen,
Yep.
versus maybe a 2 or 3 out of 10 on the front end, where you can really make this happen because you have well structured APIs. I mean, that's the whole goal of the project, is to build
Yeah, yeah,
something
yeah.
to a contract where the business services you're providing. And do we think like long term there's going to be AI used? I mean, we're already using AI to help our customers enhance their e-commerce systems on the back end, but most of them are not writing them from scratch, just vibe coding some
Right.
AI.
To bring it around from where we started, this is where headless as a structure pays dividends, because it's not just that you segregated your front end logic from your back end logic. You've isolated the areas where you have a higher risk tolerance from the areas where you have a lower risk tolerance. So it's
There
like
you
that
go.
structure pays off and lets you be a bit more experimental where you're freer to do so.
Yeah, and AI understands contracts and data inputs really well. I mean, we had a conversation just a couple of minutes ago. We were just talking about data transformation. Like,
Mm.
what can uniquely help you transform data? Like, if there was a
Mm.
technology that understood data structures well, inputs and outputs, wouldn't that be amazing? Oh, wait, we have one.
Hmm. Well, yeah, for
Right.
all its
So
deficiencies, it's good at that for sure.
it
Yeah,
is
yeah,
good at, it's great at
yeah.
that. And so, that's interesting. And that's something that if I was recommending for anybody to take on a move off of accelerator, is AI is uniquely positioned to help them go from semi-structured to well-structured data.
That might be a
It's
topic to pick up more in a future one, because
Yeah.
yeah, I think people's ears perked up. And for the moment, if you can't wait for more content, give it, again, shoot us an email, gtm@base1.com, and a human, not an LLM, will get back to you, and then we'll talk about how we can sort of use those
Yeah.
technologies and people and experts and all of that to get you where you need to be. Hey everyone, thanks so much for watching this video. I think if there's one overall takeaway from this discussion, it's that while it's really important what technology you choose, it's easy to get bogged down in the details of the technology to the exclusion of talking about what that change means for your organization, how you're going to navigate it successfully. So that's exactly why we recorded another conversation about the shift from SAP Immersis over to SAP Engagement Cloud. If you're trying to understand what's changing, what isn't, and what customers should be thinking next, then go ahead and click to watch that video. Also, subscribe below if you want to hear more conversations like that, like this. Let us know what you'd like to hear more of. We would love to see you soon. Till then. Here's one that's more generic. Thanks so much for watching this video. We hope to keep having conversations like this, so check out the other videos on our channel for more conversations like this. Subscribe below, and we hope to see you soon.